So we talked about the Articles of Confederation in the last chapter and how it wasn't doing a good job of being the rules in the government for our country. So they try to fix the Articles of Confederation. At the Constitutional Convention, they're trying to fix the issues we have, but as they're working on it, they realize there's just too much wrong with it, so they decide to get rid of those rules and start over with a brand new set of rules for our government. A guy named Edmund Randolph comes up with a plan, and he wants the government to be stronger and have more power. He also wants the number of votes each state gets to be based on the population. If you guys remember, in the previous version, the Articles of Confederation, the 13 colonies, each one got one vote. And he said bigger states with more population should get more votes. It's also going to create the 3 branches of government and Congress to make the laws. So this plan is getting a lot of traction. A lot of people like it because it gives the government more power. But a guy named Edmund Randolph, or a guy named William Patterson from New Jersey, has a different plan. His plan is called the Small State Plan, and it's similar to the one that they already have, which seems kind of foolish. If they're not happy with what they have, and this guy proposes a plan that's similar, then they're not going to get anything different. Under his plan, the government would be weaker, the states would have more power, and each state would have an equal vote. So instead of it being based on population, it would be equal for each state. So they argue and argue and argue, and it becomes obvious that they need to have a compromise. And if you guys remember what a compromise is, it's an agreement where both sides give up a little bit and you meet in the middle. So Benjamin Franklin sees everybody arguing. He's 81 years old. He's got lots of experience. He calms them down and says, you know what, we need to come to a compromise. The argument goes on, and it appears to be deadlocked. And a deadlock is when there's an argument or a battle and neither side appears to be making any progress. So they have to come up with a couple of compromises. So we'll talk about those in lesson 4. The Compromise Committee proposes something the legislative branch made up of 2 parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Their job would be to make the laws. And Edmund Randolph said that he wanted each state to get votes based on population. And in the House of Representatives, that's what happened. They said each state would get votes based on how big its population is. Now, the guy from New Jersey said he wanted each state to have the same amount of votes. And they said that they were going to allow that to happen in the Senate. In the Senate, each state gets 2 votes regardless of the population. So this plan ends up being basically a combination of the 2 previous plans, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. They basically took those ideas and shoved them together. This is called the Great Compromise. So the Great Compromise created the House of Representatives and the Senate. They had to make some more compromises if they were going to get this new set of rules, the new Constitution, passed. One of the problems is the southern states want to count their slaves in their population but not pay taxes for them. So they want to count their slaves so they get more votes, and they don't want to pay taxes for their slaves. So they want to get all these benefits for owning people. So they argue, and the compromise eventually is that the slaves count as 3/5 of a person. So they count towards the state's population, so the states get more votes, but they also have to pay taxes for them too. Other problems going on with runaway slaves, and people in the South want to keep their slaves because that's how they make their money, and they don't feel like doing the work. It's a terrible process, and it's awful. It should never happen. But if they're going to keep the country together, they have to make some compromises, and these are the compromises they decide to make. The South is afraid the North is going to get rid of slavery completely. And the North has to make a compromise called the Slave Trade Compromise, where they promise to not change any of the slavery laws or regulations for at least 20 years. So they tell the South, we won't touch your slavery for at least 20 years. So people in the South are pretty happy about this plan. They get to keep their slaves, they get more votes, they get pretty much everything they wanted. Another important part of this plan is the states would not be allowed to print their own money, and they would have a dollar or a United States dollar that all of the states will use. There wouldn't be different money for each colony or each state. The delegates decided that they would have a president instead of a king, and that person should be elected. So the president is the head of the executive branch, and their job is to enforce the laws and lead the country. They decided the president would serve for a 4-year term, and he would choose his own group of advisors. And an advisor is someone you pick to give you advice, to help you run the country, to help you do a job. The Supreme Court would be chosen, and they would serve as the highest court in the country. Their job would be to interpret the laws and basically make sure that justice is carried out. The Supreme Court has 8 judges and 1 Chief Justice, so 9 judges today. And if you've been watching the news, in today's Supreme Court, there is currently a process going on to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died. John Jay from New York became the first Chief Justice, which would make him the highest judge in the country. So the 3 branches of government set up by the Constitution, the executive, legislative, and judicial, they're still in place today. We still have those. There have been some tweaks to how they're set up, but we still have them. The delegates felt that these branches gave the government enough power, but it also stopped one person from becoming too powerful. They didn't want us to have a king like we did in England. So who signs the Constitution then? Even though there's all these compromises made, not everybody is happy about it. They feel like there's lots of things wrong with it. Some people are afraid that the Constitution takes away too much of their freedom, and they don't want to sign it. But in September 17th, 1787, the delegates signed the Constitution, and they're hoping that the states are all going to approve it. They're hoping that the 13 states, that 9 of the 13 would say yes and ratify it. Okay, so the last little bit. During the debate over the Constitution, there's another important law that gets created. There's an argument over some property east of the Mississippi River and north of the Ohio River, and basically they can't decide who is going to get this property. And Thomas Jefferson comes up with a plan called the Northwest Ordinance. He says that this land that people can't decide about will become 3 to 5 brand new states once their population is high enough. So instead of some other states taking it and making it part of their state, it would become brand new states once enough people were living there. Eventually, it becomes Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Okay, guys, let's get started. We'll knock out the worksheet for today, and then we'll have a good weekend.